So we'll start with why you're here in Rochester. What are you up to?
Sure. Well, my group is playing tomorrow night at the Bop Shop. I have a new project called Open Sesame, which collides my two worlds, that of jazz trombonist and music director at Sesame Street. So we are playing Sesame Street classics, my reimaginations of Rubber Ducky and the Sesame Street theme, and also very classic Sesame music. So we're here for that.
I love the origins of how this started, how your brothers were into the trumpet, or your cousins.
Cousins, yeah.
Okay, so your cousins are into the trumpet, but the music teacher handed you a trombone.
Yes.
An arranged marriage, you called it.
Yes. I don't know if the story goes, I used to have very buck teeth as a child. I wore braces for a long time, and at first you just play the mouthpiece. So the music teacher would come. I was growing up in Pittsburgh. We didn't have a full-time teacher. She just came once a week. So we were working with the mouthpieces, and I couldn't really get it going. So she gave me a different one. I was finally, I'm buzzing the mouthpiece. But unbeknownst to me, she had given me a trombone mouthpiece that was much bigger. So when it was instrument day, didn't know what to do. She handed me the trombone, and I was just such a shy kid. I'm like, I just took it home. I'm like, what am I going to say? So and that was it, but I loved it, and it suits me. And growing up now, and the demeanor of trombone players fits my personality much more than the trumpets.
One of the more popular musicians who tours in the Rochester area is Trombone Shorty.
Yes.
So the trombone is a very popular instrument in the Rochester area.
Trombone Shorty's the best. We just worked with him at Sesame Street. I have to show you pictures later, but they made a Trombone Shorty puppet, a Muppet.
No.
And we actually played a live concert where the puppet was like trading solos with Trombone Shorty. So I was off camera playing the parts of the puppet. It was hilarious.
Wow,
yeah.
That must have been a treat.
Oh my God, amazing.
Yeah.
And I had worked with Troy one other time before. He's the best, so yeah, more trombone, please.
Yeah, absolutely. What I love too is you arrive in New York City. I love your persistence, how you would just show up to a rehearsal of a band that you wanted to be a part of.
Yeah, that happened with the great Cecil Taylor. I was early in my years in New York much more into avant-garde jazz, and I had heard that Cecil was forming a new band, and I'm going. I'm just going to go. And he didn't say, "Who are you?" He said, "Come play," and I just stayed and never left. So I did it a few times with a few other bands. I mean, it doesn't always work out so well, but in that particular case, it was wonderful.
So my question is, as the years wore on, you became seemingly omnipresent in the jazz world in New York City. How did you move from that world onto Sesame Street?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but the short answer is I was always writing and arranging projects on the side, whereas the trombone, I would play 350 to 400 gigs a year and was touring constantly, and that was my main source of income and my main motivation. And what happened was, to get to the point, is In the Heights, Lin-Manuel Miranda's first hit musical was coming to Broadway, and they wanted to use some musicians who were authentic to the Latin scene. And I had made my living, because there's no such thing as making a living playing full-time jazz trombone. So I played with many big-name Latin bands like Eddie Palmieri and Celia Cruz for years. I still play with Eddie. And so I had not done Broadway, and they called me out of the blue, "Would you be interested in doing this?" So I said, okay. So I did the whole run of In the Heights, actually, on Broadway. And through that, one of the orchestrators was a guy named Bill Sherman, who won the Tony, along with Alex Lacamoire, for Best Orchestrations for In the Heights. And Bill, right after we opened, got hired to be music director for the Electric Company, which is an old PBS show from the 70s that they were reviving. So they hired Bill, and just through my relationship with Bill through In the Heights, he needed someone to do some horn writing. So for the first 3 years of the Electric Company, I wrote all the horns and recorded them. And then, since the Electric Company was produced by Sesame Workshop, around that time they were also looking to change over the music department, and they offered the job to Bill, and he kind of brought me on as a team, like, why don't you take the two of us? Because our skill sets are really different, but are really complementary. So we came on together almost 10 full years ago now.
Is he still there?
He is. He's my boss. So Bill's gone on to many other shows and done all kinds of other things, but he's still at Sesame with me, yeah.
And you were saying, this is a machine in a way. You really have to pump out a lot of material.
Absolutely. It's every week. I show up at the studio with a stack this big. It's many songs a week and many underscoring cues. And so, like I said, 40 to 45 recording sessions a year to do a complete season. And it kind of goes, it doesn't go in a straight line. It's not we do one complete episode, we'll do certain segments first. Like the main part of the show where Elmo and Big Bird, or they're walking around from the stoop, they call that the street story. So we might do the street stories all first, and then we'll do a different segment at different times of the year, depending on when the editing happens. But it is a machine, and we have an 8-piece band that's a steady band, and so after all these years and all these recording sessions, I know the skill set and the strengths of everybody, so I write to everyone's strengths, and I know what I do well and don't, because I still play trombone for the recordings as well, and everyone gets the routine, and you get into the studio, and it's lighthearted, and we laugh a lot, but it's work, and we crank it out, but it's beautiful.
On that note, while you have your nose to the grindstone, are there any moments when you step back and you think to yourself, I'm influencing kids and how they understand and with their relationship with music?
I do, but to be honest, that happens more often than not when I go to the set and see the music combined with the puppets, and there's usually children. They invite children or have guests of workers at the workshop come, and to see the reaction in real time, they're playing one of the songs that I wrote or orchestrated, and the delight and the magic is so profound. Especially imagine a 3-year-old kid's there, and they understand what puppetry is, and they understand that there's a human and then there's a puppet on the guy's arm. But if Elmo starts talking to them in that voice, from here back just completely disappears, and it becomes this just unbelievable magical moment. And to think that I'm part of that in some small way is it's good for me to see that, because sometimes I write most of the music from home. I have a small writing studio, and it could be a lonely gig, you know. So I mean, 30 hours a week, I'm just sitting by myself in a room. So in those moments, I don't really think about it. It's more the machine. But then going to the set is very important to me. It's to really brings it all home. Why I'm actually doing all this work.
That is so cool. What's one or two of your favorite songs that you've written for Sesame Street? Well,
I've only written a couple, but the theme song, I co-wrote the theme song. There was a new segment called Monster Foodies. It's a Cookie Monster. This was just from last season. Cookie Monster, and there's a newer puppet called Gonger. Sesame's producing a show in London called the Furchester Hotel, and one of the characters, Gonger, came, and all the music for that segment is kind of this New Orleans style brass band music. So I'm really proud of that, probably the most. And then another theme I wrote, there was another segment called Super Grover 2.0, and I wrote this epic superhero music for that segment, and those two I think really stand out as my favorites.
How was it that your skill set blended so well with this type of work?
I think my skill set as a writer and as a player, probably my greatest strength is my diversity. Whereas as a jazz musician coming up prior to Sesame Street, I don't know another jazz musician who's played with Cecil Taylor on the far left of the jazz spectrum and Wynton Marsalis on the far right, I would say, and almost every stop in between. And just looking at all music and all styles as one thing, and not really, I mean, of course, jazz is my first love, but I love all kinds of music. So the ability to come to Sesame Street and write a country music cue, write a rap cue, write a hip hop cue all in the same afternoon, and be able to orchestrate and conduct strings or mix woodwinds. Just having that giant cross section, I think, is the greatest thing I was able to bring. And a focused work ethic. I could sit and just grind out the cues like a lot of guys can't do. And that's not necessarily that my cues are better or worse, but the ability to just turn them out I don't know how I do it. It just kind of rolls out of me that way.